Thank you, Lee Hatcher. Looking forward to that. Let's bring in our panel. Joining us this public holiday Monday, and we appreciate them taking the time for it. Our regular Monday afternoon panel of political strategists, former Federal Labor strategist Bruce Hawker and Grahame Morris from Barton Deakin joins me here in the studio. Let's start on the issue of superannuation. We're still some weeks out from the budget, but plenty of speculation, including on the government's own part here. Craig Emerson saying on Sky News yesterday there should be debate around the, in his words, fabulously wealthy and the tax concessions they get on superannuation. A former minister, now backbencher, Simon Crean, has issued a warning again today that the government shouldn't be doing anything that affects superannuation earnings or do anything that's retrospective. Bruce Hawker, what do you make of all of this, and what do you think the government should, or perhaps more importantly, shouldn't do in this budget on superannuation?
What they shouldn't do is touch anything, in my view, David. I think this is one of those areas where the government's just going to open up another front, and it's going to be very difficult for them to convince the wider public that they're not going to be adversely affected by it. And that's the...
Let me put you the argument used by some in government for doing it. You know, they've got to fund things like their education and disability plans. There's not a lot of money around, and this issue of tax concessions for superannuation is only going to grow, according to Treasury, and become a bigger and bigger strain on the budget.
Well, that may be, but right now we've got a government which is struggling to tell a very good story about superannuation and the contraposition between where it stands on superannuation and where Tony Abbott does. And while people have this nagging concern that they're going to be affected because the government isn't ruling anything in or ruling anything out, then they're in a very difficult position, and it allows the opposition to foment the problem. And I think that's where the government just has to learn to communicate much better with the electorate and basically rule this out this time around. I know they've got a problem with the budget, but frankly, sometimes I think the cure is worse than the disease, and this is a case in point.
Grahame, I'm sure there's not going to be a lot of disagreement between you and Bruce on this topic today.
No, look, this is really getting out of control. Really getting out of control.
Really? I mean, we always have pre-budget speculation.
No, but look, I get calls from all over Australia. Well, you know, what's going to happen to the Prime Minister? You know, how's Tony Abbott going? I don't often get them on policy. I'm getting them on this one. You know, what is going to happen for superannuation? Why is the government playing with it? You know, the former Labor government introduced the super stuff, and then Howard and Costello introduced stuff where there was an incentive for people, small business people, middle Australia, the wealthy Australia, to look after themselves, put a bit more in. And if you start tinkering with that, you start taking things away, people get very concerned. And I'll tell the Labor Party this because there's some wise heads around who remember. In 1984, the Labor government then tried this with a thing called the assets test. And it wasn't just the elderly who were worried. The mums and dads, or the kids of the elderly, thought, hey, mum and dad's going to get a bit ripped off, I'm not going to get some stuff here. And the grandchildren were saying, hey, hang on, why are they picking on grandma and granddad? And it became a generational thing which nearly meant Andrew Peacock beat Bob Hawke on one issue.
You mentioned getting calls on this. And, you know, I can tell you, even as a journalist, people are asking me as well what's going to happen on super. It's one of those things that really matters to people that politicians muck around with. They don't like it. I asked Stephen Smith about whether this period of speculation, where the government's clearly not going to rule out or rule in what it's doing, people might start shifting their investments away from superannuation, fearing what might come in the budget. Do you think that's going to happen, Grahame?
Well, I think some of the financial institutions will be starting to get a bit anxious, and they're starting to hedge things. But that's why I think they've got to be very careful. We all understand that you can't sort of say in and out, whatever is in the budget. But it would have given the government, because it's now running, it would have given the government a bit of a chance to say, hey, look at what we've been doing at super, look at what we've done in the past and in recent thing, and we are not going to do anything stupid. Instead of that, they're sort of closed mouth that looked as if, they are going to do something, and that's really dangerous.
Bruce, what do they do if they're not going to touch super? And obviously they are, by the looks of it, but where else can they find money? That's the question.
Well, as I said earlier, I mean, I think, you know, we are not going to see a balanced budget this time around, or if we do, it'll be in such a, you know, it'll be at such cost and such pain to the wider public the bragging rights about having had a balanced budget will just pale into insignificance compared to the grief that it's going to cause people. You know, we have a strong economy. We can talk about this in a little while. We've got a strong economy. It's one of the strong economies in the world at the moment. You know, we don't have to be too fussed about the state of the budget. Obviously, we don't want it to go deeply into debt, but, you know, sometimes you actually do have to have a bit of debt there in the government budget so that you can afford other things, or you can refrain from doing certain things. So I think that's where I'd be looking now. Is it really worth the candle, this idea about they're going to somehow save all this money? But can I make this other point, David? And this is an important thing. You know, Tony Abbott has a policy to do away with the mining tax, which would mean that the Australian low-income workers, 5 million of them, I think it is, would not be getting the extra $500 a year that they currently get out of superannuation, which comes straight from the benefits of the mining tax. So here we have an opportunity for the government to say, we're not going to touch super. Tony Abbott's going to touch super because he's going to touch the mining tax, and they can get a double bang out of it, but they don't seem to be wanting to go down that path. Let's start communicating.
Tony Abbott's communicating's the issue here.
Earth to Bruce, the mining tax didn't raise any money. How are you going to pay for all of these things if the mining tax is not raising any money?
Yeah, the projections are that the mining tax is going to be bringing income in. This is where the money's coming from to pay for people's benefits out of superannuation. They're getting an extra $500 a year as a result of the mining tax. That's going to be an ongoing benefit that the Australian public's going to enjoy. Everyone knows that's going to be an ongoing benefit if the government is returned. At the moment, you know, they're not in a position to defend their position on superannuation because they're not talking about it, and they're not in a position to attack Tony Abbott over his commitment to do away with the mining tax, which would return money for people to improve their superannuation benefits on an ongoing basis.
Someone who is talking about it just before we move off this subject, Simon Crean, the fact that he is speaking out on policy now, you know, and feels quite comfortable telling the government what it should be doing. He's got the freedom as a backbencher to do that. Is that a concern, do you think, for Julia Gillard?
Well, only if they don't listen to him. That's the issue. Only if they don't listen to him. You know, listen to the people, you know, that have got your best interests at heart here. It's so frustrating. It's unbelievable. Anyway, next question.
We'll take a break. We'll come back with the next question. Plenty more to discuss, including the PM's trip to China coming up this week. What sort of message should the PM be delivering on North Korea in particular? Stay with us. You're watching PM Agenda. Welcome back to the program. We're talking this afternoon to Grahame Morris and Bruce Hawker. As mentioned, the Prime Minister this week heads to China. This will be a high-powered delegation of government and business leaders talking about all range of things, Bruce Hawker, including, of course, economic and trade ties, but also North Korea, you would think, will or should be high on the agenda. How important do you see this visit?
Well, it's always very important, David, because the economy of China is so intricately associated with Australia. They are our biggest trading partner. So anything that we can do to enhance the relationship between Australia and China and improve the prospects of our exports there is got to be welcome and an important time spent by the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and the others in that delegation. Apparently, they're looking at ways of improving, of changing the exchange arrangements between China and Australia on the currency front, which will make life easier for us if that happens. If that's a deal that's already been done, I don't know if it has, and they're there to basically rubber stamp it, that's very good news for us. And of course, you know, North Korea becomes, again in the last few days, a huge international headache in which China has to play a critical role.
This, Grahame, is such a fascinating relationship, the Australia-China one, so important when it comes to our trade relations. Number one trading partner now. But again, with issues like North Korea, it's such a sensitive topic to bring up. What can the Prime Minister realistically tell China or suggest to China on this?
Yeah, look, they do accept it, a bit of advice, a bit of an elbow, reluctantly. But look, the Prime Minister's job, she's got a couple of jobs. The first one is to go in there and to suggest to them nicely that they keep some pressure on their mates and the bullheads, really, on their southern border. You know, the world cannot tolerate this North Korean regime the way it is going. And its big brother, China, can calm them down a bit. And the other one that the PM will find most unusual is that the Chinese expect the heads of government to be able to negotiate, to deal on commercial stuff and economic stuff, and it's quite different for any other country. And I think Bruce is right. I think if we could walk away from this trip where we are one of the three most favoured currencies, so that instead of poor old Australian exporters and Australian dollars having to get converted into US dollars or Japanese yen so that we can deal with the Chinese, we just do it directly. And if she walks away with that, she'll have done well.
Yeah, no, that's a fair point. And more generally on the economy, Bruce, we've also seen an OECD report out overnight that has positive things to say about Australia. We saw the AAA credit rating reaffirmed by the 3 agencies. I think we're only one of 8 countries that has that. There's a good story to tell there about the economy for the government at the moment, notwithstanding debt levels and the budget deficit. But it's just not getting across, is it?
That's the problem, David. We've got a great story to tell. We're one of only 8 countries in the world that have what they call the 9A's rating. That's AAA rating from Fitch, Standard & Poor's and Moody's. You know, unemployment dropped again or stayed steady in January, created 71,000 new jobs. Debt is low in Australia compared to other countries, like 23% compared to 86%, I think, in the UK. 200% in China and in Japan, and yet we can't ever seem to get this message across that Australia has got a good economy. And this is just another challenge for the government that they really have to work on. They can't just allow the opposition to keep telling everybody that we'll all be doomed, the sky's going to fall in, that we've got an economy somewhere between Cyprus and Greece. You know, we don't. We've got a strong economy, and the Chinese trip, in a way, is an opportunity to reinforce that point for the Prime Minister. But they've really got to start selling those messages very strongly. Everything just seems to get lost in white noise. And harking back to the superannuation issue, that's another example of it. While they're talking about superannuation, everyone thinks they're going to lose, even though they're not. Then they can't get across good stories about the state of the economy.
The positive stuff. We're nearly out of time, but Grahame, I just quickly wanted to touch on with you a very extensive interview an interesting interview from Tony Abbott last night with Chris Kenny on Sky News. Amongst other things, gay marriage was covered a fair bit. Tony Abbott has pretty much said, look, it's party position opposed to gay marriage, therefore there won't be a conscience vote, and seemed to indicate even in the next term there wouldn't be a conscience vote. Do you think he should be a bit more flexible on this?
I don't think there's going to be. Look, I think the coalition is 2 generations at least off changing its policy on this. And I don't know why everyone is looking at Tony Abbott. Prime Minister Gillard is the one with the numbers in the Parliament, and she won't let it through. So why is everyone picking on Tony?
Well,
but I do think the coalition's a couple of generations off accepting this.
Couple of generations off. Interesting. All right, we're going to have to.
Labor isn't binding its members either, David. It's not binding its members.
Well, good point. Good point. We'll have to wrap it up there. Bruce Hawker, Grahame Morris. Good to talk to you both. Thanks so much for joining us today.